Welcome to the next part. We're now going to work on the TicTacToe controller and firstly look at the getGrid game state. Now, what we want to do here is just make a nice self-contained function, and I like to think of these as the building blocks of the program. And this private function will just pass in the grid string, which is a string of 9 characters, one for each cell. And we're going to go using a for loop through each position and check the position and what's in that particular cell. And we're going to use a switch statement, and we're going to have several different cases, and they're all going to be the cell states. So if it's cell state X, then we're going to increment the X count. If it's cell state O, we'll increment the O count, and these will keep track of how many moves have been made by either player. Now, if we get an actual CS X win or a CS O win, as soon as we hit one of those, we've basically got a winning state. So that's one thing to look out for. In this case, if we've got a CS empty, we're going to do nothing. And in this case, with the X win and O win, we can return straight away. And probably in this case, there's no need for the break to be there in the switch statement in this case, because it would just jump straight out of this function anyway. And with that, if this continues and completes, then we know that it's neither an X win or an O win. Therefore, we're in amongst the game at some point, and this is where we're going to use the X count and the O count. Now we know the X goes first, so if the number of X turns equals O turns, then we know it's X's turn. That's one of the things we can assume. And also the fact that if the X count is at 5, we know that basically the game is finished, that there is some sort of draw state going on, because they would have had their last go, and the last go would be, of course, an X. Now, when the X count does equal the O count, we know that it is the X player's turn, because they're always one ahead. Otherwise, we know it's going to be the O player's turn. So in this case, this function nicely works with whatever grid state we have, and it'll give back the game state, or validate the game state for a grid we give it, or check it out. Otherwise, we've also got this unknown state in case something doesn't compute. Now, also here again, I've added comments in the final version, so you can always look at that version as well, which I've got online. Now, the Savegame function, which is another private function, we're just going to create a new game. Now that's for the Deo class. Remember, it's the one with just the properties, and each property is each column of the row of that table. And so here, what we're going to do is create a new one, and then we're going to set each of the columns, and in this case we're setting them to the values of this TicTacToe class. So we're going to initialize the game ID to the game ID we've got currently. We'll initialize the game grid to the game grid state that we've got currently. And then what we're going to do, the game move index is actually populated by our trigger. In this case, this is the primary key, and the auto increment. In this case, we're just going to return that from the insert. Okay, so we end up with that primary key. But for the actual game ID, we want to actually return it after the trigger's been used. So we have to actually reload the row using this game move index, the primary key. And that way we can get the game ID. So if this is a new game, for instance, and the game ID is -1, we'll actually get back a game ID that's not -1, it'll be valid. And therefore we want to set this and update this. Again, this is the version with the extra comments, so I'll just pasting that in after so you can see just developing without the comments and adding it. Now the next part is part of the actual display side. So we've got this print cell function, which will just print one cell, which will have an X or a naught or nothing in it, or an active clickable area. So I've just got the HTML tags for the cell, the TD, the opening and the closing to start off with. And then inside that I'm putting a switch based on the value of the cell. And you notice I've just made a self-contained function that'll receive a game ID, value, position, whether it's clickable or not. Now in this case I'm just going to have different cases for each of the cell states, and so I think there's about 5 of them. And then for each of them I'm going to echo out different cell contents. Okay, and in this case, this is where it matches the UML diagram where I was showing you the play PHP links to a number of different GIF files in this case. And the GIF files vary depending on the cell state. So we've got the CSEmpty, CSX, CSO, CSXWin, and CSOWin. And the empty can be an active empty or an inactive empty. So the active is where we can click on it. In all these cases, we're going to use the image tag, and the source is going to be a GIF of a similar name to the status. And so we've got XOWin and XWin. Now, if it's clickable, rather than just putting the image, the empty image in, we're going to put in probably an animated GIF that'll give the user feedback as to the fact they can click on it. But also we want to, and this is so it works on any server this is deployed to, when we're making it clickable, we're actually going to put in the server address and then the name of the page, page PHP, or play PHP, sorry. And in this case, we're going to echo this out, and here you can see the link and containing those particular variables. So you notice the underscore server. Again, we've got some of these magic globals that we're using, and we're getting the HTTP host and then the PHP self parameters to actually work out the address dynamically. Okay, and this is better than hard coding address, which would then fail if we moved servers, for instance. Okay, and once we've created that URL for the ref, then basically we've got a cell that can be clicked on, and then it'll trigger the play PHP. And here you can see we've got the empty active GIF, and that'll be animated. And then we've got the can move function, which just returns true if it's player O and player game state O turn, or if it's player type X and it's game state X turn. Now that's important because we use the can move function in a few places, and you notice that it's also private, so it's just used internally. Now display grid is the final step for this demonstration, and here we're actually got the ability to use the cell function we just made to print out each cell, but we're actually going to create the bigger table structure around it. So we've got this clickable flag which uses the can move function, and we've got a game ID. If it's equal to -1, then it's probably going to be clickable because that's a new game. And there's this override clickable flag which we can use depending how we're using the display grid. Now remember, display grid is also private, so it'll just be used internally by the TicTacToe class. So here we're using the print cell function, passing the game ID, the grid position, so the value of that position, and 0 whether it's clickable. And you can see here I've just added the echoes. So this is the first row of our Noughts and Crosses grid, 0, 1 and 2. And then you can see the next row HTML tags, and then the final row HTML tags. So I've just copied and pasted that row, and then I'm just updating the values in the array for the grid and the position array. And so there we've got all 9 positions, 3 rows, and each row having 3 cells. And then that's pretty much it. That'll display our grid and a function that's usable. And pretty much after we've finished with this, we'll have a function we can use to display the grid on our page.